I never imagined that my sister's wedding would turn into one of the most terrifying days of my life. There I was, standing at the edge of the grand hall, watching my adopted daughter, Maya, smile as she held her little basket of petals. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. She was 7 years old, dressed in a frilly white dress, and completely unaware that her happiness was about to be threatened by someone who was supposed to love her. Have you ever felt that helplessness? Seeing someone you care about, someone innocent, on the verge of being hurt, and knowing that it's coming from someone close to you? That's exactly how I felt in that moment. Maya had been my light from the moment she came into my life 2 years ago. Adoption is not just a legal process. It's a series of victories, trust-building exercises, and moments of proving to a child that love can be unconditional. She had thrived in that love. She was confident, cheerful, playful, the kind of child whose laughter fills the room and whose presence demands attention. And yet, standing there, holding her tiny basket, she was completely vulnerable, surrounded by hundreds of people, and smiling through a storm she could not see. I glanced at my sister, Hannah, 28, the bride, my younger sibling, and someone I had always shared a complex relationship with. She was ambitious, meticulous, and always had this need to control everything around her. Over the years, I had noticed subtle digs, comments about how I chose to raise Maya, the way she questioned my decisions, the little jabs that seemed insignificant at first, but added up over time. I never imagined that she would take it this far, that she would try to remove my daughter from her wedding in front of everyone. And then it happened. The whisper. Hannah leaned slightly toward the security officer stationed near the aisle and whispered words that froze my blood. "Remove her." I froze. The music continued to play. Guests were chatting and laughing a few feet away, oblivious at first. But the seconds stretched like hours. The security officer began walking toward us. He was professional, steady, but deliberate, and every step felt like a countdown. Every step felt like a threat to my daughter's happiness, to her sense of safety, to the trust we had built together. I didn't panic. I couldn't. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, but panic would only make this worse. I had to act decisively. Have you ever been in a situation where your instincts scream to act, but your brain has to calculate strategy at the same time? That's exactly where I was. Maya's small hand gripped mine, her innocent eyes flicking up at me, sensing tension but not fully understanding it. Her trust in me was palpable. She needed me to be the calm anchor in the middle of chaos. Guests began to notice. Some leaned forward, whispering to each other, casting curious glances in our direction. Some started pulling out their phones, capturing what they suspected might be an unusual moment. Whispers spread like wildfire. "What's happening? Why is security moving toward a child?" The energy in the room shifted. The celebration was still happening around us, but the center of attention had become the unfolding drama of a child potentially being removed by security at her own aunt's wedding. I looked back at Hannah. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, calculating, determined. This wasn't anger. It was strategy. She had spent months planning her perfect day, meticulously orchestrating everything. And in her mind, removing my daughter without confrontation was just another step in her plan. But she hadn't accounted for one thing: me. I had been preparing for moments like this, the invisible battles, the subtle strategies, the ways to protect Maya when no one else seemed to care. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to argue with Hannah. That would have been futile. I made a single call. One call. And, in that moment, everything was about to change. The guard paused mid-step, uncertainty flickering across his face. Guests leaned closer, their murmurs rising, sensing something unusual, but unable to fully grasp it. Maya looked up at me again, confused, searching for reassurance. I whispered, "It's okay. We're fine." My words were calm, but inside, my heart was racing. 3 minutes. That's all it took for the situation to completely flip. My sister's meticulously planned day, the symbol of her control and perfection, began to unravel. And then, the sound came, a scream. Piercing. Impossible to ignore. Hannah's voice cut through the music, the whispers, the very atmosphere of the room. The carefully orchestrated facade of her perfect wedding crumbled instantly. Guests turned, mouths open in shock. Maya's small face showed confusion, fear, but also trust in me. My grip on her hand was firm, steady, and protective. But this was just the beginning. The scream was only the start of a cascade of events that would expose hidden tensions, force public confrontation, and reveal truths that had been simmering under the surface of our family for years. Because at that wedding, one call, one moment of calm decisiveness, was about to change everything. And what came next would completely shatter the illusion of control my sister had worked so hard to maintain. And no one saw it coming. Have you ever watched someone you love being targeted in front of hundreds of strangers? That's what it felt like as I watched the security guard take a deliberate step toward Maya. She was smiling, holding her little basket of petals, trying to stay cheerful, but I could see the tiny crease in her forehead, the way her lip trembled, the subtle flicker of fear in her eyes. Even at 7, children can sense danger. She trusted me, but she didn't understand why someone who was supposed to love her would try to remove her from the most important day of her aunt's life. The room had gone quiet. Music played, but it seemed distant, muffled, as if a heavy fog of tension had settled over the wedding hall. Guests turned their heads, whispering to one another, sensing that something was off. Some were curious, some confused, and a few looked alarmed. A wedding is supposed to be full of joy, laughter, and celebration, right? But in that moment, the room felt like a courtroom, everyone watching an unfolding drama, waiting for someone to intervene. Maya's small hand tightened around mine. Her grip was both a plea and a reassurance, a reminder of why I had to stay calm. I whispered softly, "It's okay, sweetie. Everything's fine. Trust me." My voice was steady, but inside, my heart was hammering. Every parent knows that feeling. The instant fear that something might happen to your child and the raw determination to do whatever it takes to stop it. I looked at Hannah. She didn't flinch. She wasn't angry. She was calculated. Her eyes were sharp, focused, and cold. She had spent months planning this wedding down to the smallest detail, and in her mind, removing Maya quietly would preserve her perfect day. She hadn't expected resistance, not from me, not from anyone. And in that single glance, I realized the depths of her obsession with control. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a demonstration of power over her guests, over her husband-to-be, over me, and, in this moment, over my daughter. The security guard paused mid-step. You could see the hesitation in his movement, the slight tilt of his head, the way his hand hovered near his belt. He didn't know what to do next. He was professional, trained to follow instructions, but the tension in the air was making him doubt. Around us, whispers began to rise. Guests leaned closer, trying to figure out why security was approaching a child. Some pulled out their phones. Others whispered under their breath, "What's going on? Why is she being removed?" The energy in the room shifted. Suddenly, we were the center of attention, and everyone sensed the impending confrontation. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't try to reason with Hannah. That would have been pointless and dangerous in front of all these people. I had to act strategically. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and made a call. Not a long explanation, not a negotiation, one call. That's all it took. But in that moment, no one in the room could know what I was doing. I had to maintain the calm, the facade, while subtly shifting the balance of power in my favor. Maya noticed something changing. Her eyes flicked up at me, confusion mixed with trust. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew I was in control. I whispered reassurance again. "It's okay. Just stay with me." The seconds ticked by like hours. Security was frozen. Guests were whispering. Hannah's face tightened slightly, a subtle sign that her plan might be unraveling. And all of this, in silence, felt like a war waging in slow motion. Then came the first sign of change. The guard's step slowed, uncertainty spreading across his face. He looked at me, hesitant, unsure whether to continue. Guests leaned forward, their curiosity palpable, sensing that the balance of authority had shifted. Hannah's expression, so composed moments ago, began to falter. The control she had relied on for months was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to stop it. And then it happened, the scream. Sharp, piercing, impossible to ignore. Hannah's voice exploded into the hall, cutting through the music, the whispers, and the very atmosphere of the wedding. Her perfect facade, her meticulously planned day, crumbled instantly. Guests turned in shock. Mouths opened, some gasping, some frozen in disbelief. Maya's small face twisted in confusion and fear, but I held her tightly, whispering reassurances. The calm I projected was her anchor, and I could feel her trust in me strengthening even as chaos erupted around us. But that scream was only the beginning. The ripple of events that followed would expose long-hidden family tensions, force public confrontation, and reveal truths that had been simmering under the surface for years. The carefully constructed image of a perfect wedding had shattered, and everyone in that room, including Hannah, was about to see just how far I would go to protect my daughter. Because in that moment, one call, one decision, and one calm, deliberate action would prove something vital, that when a child's safety and happiness are threatened, courage, strategy, and composure can be more powerful than control, intimidation, or anger. And what came next, the events that would unfold in the next 3 minutes, would change the family dynamic forever and leave everyone in that room in disbelief. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have one chance to protect someone you love, and the entire outcome depends on a single action? That's exactly how it felt in that moment. The room had gone quiet, the music a distant hum, and all eyes were on us. The security guard was frozen mid-step, caught between obedience and uncertainty. Guests whispered among themselves, and Hannah's composure was cracking by the second. It was then that I realized. Sometimes, one phone call can change everything. I held Maya's hand tighter. Her small fingers were trembling, but her trust in me never wavered. I whispered, "Stay calm, sweetie. Just a few more moments. Everything will be okay." My voice had to carry strength, reassurance, and control, all at the same time. I could feel the tension radiating from Hannah like heat, a cold and calculated anger that had been simmering for years. She thought she could manipulate the situation, quietly removing my daughter without anyone noticing. But she underestimated two things: my resolve and the power of preparation. I reached into my purse and dialed the number I knew would immediately neutralize the threat. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. One sentence, delivered clearly and calmly: "Security, stop immediately. There will be no action taken against my daughter." That was it. But the effect was immediate. The security guard froze completely, unsure what to do. The room felt as if it was holding its breath. Guests noticed the sudden pause, and whispers turned into quiet murmurs of confusion. Hannah's eyes narrowed. She looked from me to the security guard and back again, realizing too late that her plan was unraveling. Her perfectly constructed aura of control was beginning to crumble. She opened her mouth, likely to issue another order, but stopped. The power she had assumed she held over the situation had been quietly taken from her in one subtle, strategic move. And in that pause, the room seemed to shift. Energy, curiosity, and tension collided, all focused on the small triangle of my daughter, me, and the bewildered security guard. Maya glanced up at me again, confusion and relief mingling in her eyes. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she sensed the change. Her tiny hand squeezed mine, as if acknowledging that I had everything under control. And in that moment, I realized that the calm composure I projected was just as important as the phone call itself. It wasn't just authority on paper, it was reassurance, trust, and love, all communicated silently in a single handhold. Guests were starting to notice something bigger. A few of them whispered, "What is going on?" Others pulled out their phones, ready to capture a moment that they didn't yet understand but knew was unusual. Some looked shocked, some looked curious, and some were visibly uncomfortable, sensing the tension but unable to place it. And Hannah? She was frozen. Her face, once so composed, now betrayed panic. Her shoulders tightened, her jaw clenched, and the careful mask of the perfect bride began to crack. And then it happened. The scream. Hannah's voice erupted into the room, piercing the music, the murmurs, the very air around us. It was sharp, unrelenting, and completely unplanned. Guests turned toward her in shock, their eyes wide. Some gasped audibly. Others whispered furiously among themselves, trying to figure out what had provoked this sudden chaos. And in the middle of it all, Maya's face showed a mix of fear, confusion, and an emerging trust in my control. I held her hand, keeping my own composure even as the room spiraled into chaos around us. The beauty of weddings is often in the perception of perfection, and Hannah had relied on that illusion to maintain control over everyone, her guests, her security, and even her family. But the scream shattered that illusion completely. What she didn't anticipate was that my calm action, one decisive call, had shifted the authority in the room. Security was no longer moving toward Maya. Guests were starting to understand that something extraordinary was happening. And Hannah's authority, built on careful planning and control, was crumbling faster than she could respond. But it wasn't just about stopping security. It was about exposing the deeper issue, her attempt to exert control over a child, a situation that was morally and emotionally wrong, and demonstrating that I would protect my daughter no matter what. The shockwaves were immediate. People were talking quietly, exchanging glances. Some tried to process the situation logically, others emotionally. And through it all, Maya remained by my side, safe, reassured, and beginning to understand, in her own way, the power of her mother's protective presence. I could feel Hannah's panic growing. Her eyes darted, searching for a new way to assert control. But the opportunity had passed. I had already acted, strategically and decisively. And yet, the climax hadn't arrived. The room was tense, the audience engaged, and the next moments were about to prove just how far her unraveling would go. Because in less than 3 minutes, everything Hannah had meticulously planned for her perfect day was collapsing. The scream, the frozen security, the shifting energy of the room, it was only the beginning of what would become a wedding chaos that no one in that hall would ever forget. And in that instant, I knew the truth. One calm, deliberate action could change the outcome completely, even against someone who thought they had absolute control. But what came next, what Hannah did in the middle of her meltdown, would shock everyone in the room, and it would change the family dynamic forever. Have you ever been in a room where everything you thought was controlled suddenly erupts into chaos? That's exactly what happened at my sister's wedding. Hannah's scream had cut through the air like a blade, freezing the music, silencing conversations, and turning hundreds of happy guests into shocked witnesses. For a moment, time seemed to slow. I held Maya tightly, feeling her tiny body tremble against mine. Her wide eyes were fixed on me, seeking reassurance. And I knew right then that everything depended on how I handled the next few minutes. The security officer, Mr. Daniels, was frozen mid-step, caught between the orders he had been given and the new instructions I had calmly delivered over the phone. He was professional, but clearly unnerved by the unusual circumstances. Around us, guests whispered and craned their necks, trying to make sense of the scene. Some pulled out their phones to record, their curiosity and shock driving them to document the unfolding drama. It felt surreal. A wedding had transformed into a tense standoff in a matter of seconds. Hannah was frantic. Her carefully curated composure had vanished. Her hands trembled, her face flushed with frustration and disbelief, and her eyes darted from me to security to the crowd. Her meticulously planned day. The picture-perfect images, the flawless decorations, the narrative of a seamless wedding was unraveling right in front of everyone she cared about. The reality of losing control was sinking in, and for someone who had always relied on authority and precision, this was devastating. Guests were starting to murmur louder. Some leaned toward each other, speculating about what had happened. Why is she screaming? Why isn't security doing anything? Who called them off? Their confusion only heightened the tension. Every eye in the room seemed to be searching for answers, and every moment of silence made Hannah's unraveling even more dramatic. And through it all, Maya remained by my side, her tiny hand in mine, a quiet reminder of why I had to stay calm, deliberate, and strategic. I could feel Hannah's desperation growing. Her breathing was uneven, her movements sharp and erratic. She realized that her plan, the silent removal of my daughter, had failed spectacularly. But what she didn't anticipate was how quickly the balance of power could shift with one calm decision. The authority she assumed she had, built on intimidation and pretense, was now in my hands. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking about humiliation or revenge. I was thinking about Maya's safety, her trust, and her understanding that her mother would always protect her no matter what. The room seemed to pulse with tension. Guests were whispering, glancing nervously, and some were visibly trying to hide their surprise. The wedding planner appeared flustered, moving quickly to diffuse the chaos, while servers paused mid-step, unsure how to proceed. The entire atmosphere had shifted from celebration to suspense. And in the middle of it all, Maya looked up at me, her confusion slowly turning to trust as she realized that I had the situation under control. Then it happened, the moment that would cement the shift. I calmly guided Maya slightly closer to me, ensuring that her presence was undeniable. Security, still frozen, took a small step back, their hesitation reinforcing the authority I now held. Guests' whispers turned into murmurs of realization. They were beginning to see the unfolding power dynamic, the mother protecting her child, and the bride losing control in a very public way. Hannah's panic reached its peak. Her scream had drawn attention, and now, the weight of public scrutiny pressed down on her like a tidal wave. Hannah's hands flew to her face, partly in frustration, partly in disbelief. Her voice quivered as she tried to reassert herself, but the more she struggled, the more obvious her loss of control became. In that moment, it wasn't just a wedding meltdown. It was a revelation, a public exposure of her attempt to dominate a child and manipulate a situation for personal satisfaction. Everyone could see it, and the shock on the guests' faces was palpable. Maya's trust in me strengthened. She realized that her mother was in control, that no adult, no matter how powerful or angry, could override the bond and protection we shared. I whispered softly, "It's okay, sweetie. Everything is fine now." Her small fingers tightened around mine, and I felt the weight of responsibility, pride, and love all at once. In those moments, I understood that parenting wasn't just about guidance or care. It was about presence, courage, and decisive action when it mattered most. And yet, even as the chaos peaked, the climax of the confrontation hadn't fully played out. Guests were stunned, Hannah was overwhelmed, and security was cautiously following my lead. But one final twist was coming. A moment that would fully expose Hannah's intentions, reaffirm my protective stance, and leave everyone in the room in shock. The scene was set. The players were in place. And what happened next would change the family dynamic forever. Because sometimes, a single moment of courage, clarity, and calm decisiveness is all it takes to turn the tide, and what unfolded in the next few seconds would prove that in the most dramatic way imaginable. The room was still buzzing, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and disbelief hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Hannah stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly, her face pale as she realized just how completely her control had slipped away. The perfect wedding she had imagined, every detail, every guest impression, every carefully curated moment, had crumbled in front of hundreds of witnesses. But as I held Maya tightly in my arms, I felt something far more important than embarrassment or revenge: relief. Relief that she was safe. Relief that her trust in me had been validated. Relief that, in a moment of chaos, I had been the anchor she needed. Have you ever had a moment where everything you feared could happen actually did, yet you somehow managed to emerge unscathed? That was what it felt like in that hall. Guests were still whispering, some wide-eyed, some shaking their heads in disbelief. People who had been focusing on the glamour and perfection of the wedding were now focused on a quiet, unassuming woman, me, standing firm, composed, and utterly in control, protecting her child. It was surreal, watching the shock on faces of people who had never witnessed this side of family dynamics before. Maya looked up at me, her eyes wide and glistening, trying to process the whirlwind around her. "Mommy, are we okay?" she asked softly, clutching my hand. My heart swelled with both love and pride. "Yes, sweetie," I whispered. "We're more than okay. We're safe, and nothing is going to hurt you while I'm here." That small moment, her innocent trust in me, was the real victory. The guests could see the drama, but Maya's eyes held the truth that love, presence, and protection mattered far more than control, perfection, or appearances. Hannah's meltdown continued, though it had shifted from anger to shock. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the stunned guests, the frozen security, and the undeniable reality that her attempt to manipulate a child's presence had failed. Her scream had drawn attention, but her realization of defeat was internal and devastating. She had relied on authority and fear to get what she wanted, but authority is meaningless when confronted with someone willing to act decisively to protect what they love most. The wedding planner tried to restore order, but the energy of the room had changed irreversibly. People were whispering in corners, some exchanging knowing glances, others silently congratulating me for my composure. The moment wasn't about weddings or decorations anymore. It was about courage. It was about standing up for the most vulnerable, even when doing so in public could have led to humiliation or confrontation. And it was about showing that a child's well-being always comes first, no matter the circumstances. 3 minutes had changed everything. One phone call, one calm action, one deliberate choice had shifted the balance of power completely. Security no longer acted. Guests were watching the unraveling of a carefully constructed facade, and my daughter's trust in me had strengthened in ways words could barely capture. Hannah had planned to control the narrative, but the story had rewritten itself, one in which love, courage, and strategy triumphed over manipulation, entitlement, and fear. I took a deep breath, letting the tension drain from my body. Maya rested her head against my shoulder, still holding tightly to my hand. For a brief moment, the chaos around us felt almost distant. I looked at my sister, my younger sibling, and I realized that control and perfection are illusions. What matters most is integrity, decisiveness, and protecting those who rely on you. Hannah had built a day on appearances. I had acted on love. And that distinction had never been clearer. As the wedding slowly returned to motion, the guests still processing the events, I whispered to Maya, "See? Everything turned out okay because we stayed calm and trusted each other." Her small nod, a mixture of relief and pride, told me everything I needed to know. In that moment, I realized that parenting isn't just about teaching lessons, it's about embodying them. It's about showing your child that courage can take many forms: calm, strategic, protective forms that leave no room for doubt about who they can rely on. And though the wedding would continue, the story of that day had already been written. Everyone who had witnessed it would remember the drama, the scream, and the sudden reversal of power. But for Maya and me, it wasn't about gossip or spectacle. It was about trust, safety, and the quiet victory of a mother protecting her child in the middle of chaos. That victory would resonate far beyond the walls of that hall, shaping our relationship in ways both profound and lasting. Finally, I turned to the camera of my memory, reflecting not just for the guests, but for anyone watching this story. Sometimes life puts us in impossible situations. Sometimes the people who should love us are the ones who create fear. And sometimes one calm, decisive action, one moment of courage, can change everything. Protect your loved ones. Stand up when it matters. And remember, appearances can be deceiving, but integrity and love will always show their true strength. Because in the end, that wedding was never about flowers, music, or dresses. It was about proving that love and courage are more powerful than control and fear. And that lesson, more than anything else, is what Maya and I carried with us long after the music played on and the guests returned to their celebrations.